Today, I'm going to discuss The Acolyte, Episode 3. Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Well, today we come to the most infamous episode of The Acolyte, Episode 3. Technically it's called Destiny, but the episode names only seem to appear in the episode list, so I don't know that anyone calls it that. Set on the forested planet of Brendock, it takes place 16 years before the events of the first two episodes, back when Osha and May were only 8 years old. They're part of a coven of witches. That's what they call it. From here on out, I'm going to call them space witches, because they're really people who use the Force differently than the Jedi do, not people who make a deal with Satan in order to use his power to harm their neighbors. The main theme of the episode is that Osha does not want to be part of the coven of space witches, while May does. She really does. A secondary theme is that May is selfish, controlling, cruel, and really into being a space witch. I know I said that twice, but she really is. They emphasize it a lot. Also, it comes up later, but it's helpful to know now. The twins were created by the head witch using the Force instead of being conceived naturally. We'll get to that, but it helps to explain what they're doing here and their weird relationship to everyone else. Also, possibly, why May is a psychopath. Oddly, in the episode's main theme of Osha wanting to leave the coven, I think that we may have come to the most realistic thing in the Acolyte. Reproductive monastic communities do not work because children aren't identical to their parents. However much you carefully select the members of the monastic community for certain traits, their offspring will have far more variation. This is, to some degree, the purpose of sexual reproduction, so it shouldn't be a surprise. And yet, it always is a surprise to every monastic community which is not celibate. I know that technically, within the story, the twins were not created by sexual reproduction, but they only look somewhat like the space witch who created them and nothing like the space witch who gestated them. So, however they were made clearly makes the same kind of variety as sexual reproduction does. For a real-world example, consider the Puritans who came to America in order to found their perfect Protestant society. I'm speaking loosely, but they were essentially a sex-integrated monastic community, and they found out, to their horror, that many, if not most, of their children were not cut out to be part of it. Monastic communities only work if they acknowledge that they're not a pattern for most people and select from the larger, more varied reproductive community, only that minority who is cut out to be part of the monastic community. This is why all successful monastic communities require celibacy of their members. It's only when you give up reproduction that you can be as narrow and homogeneous as a monastic community exists to be. Now, don't misunderstand me. There's still plenty of variety in terms of personalities within any given monastic community. I just mean that they have a lot more in common with each other than they do with humanity as a whole, which is the point of the community. It's what lets them have a focus. It's also why they pretty much invariably have a lengthy trial period where people who think that they might be a fit get to live with the community for a while, as members, like being part of the community, like they would as part of the community, I mean. And they get to do that before permanently joining, and then they only get to permanently join with the permission of the community. Of course, the specifics vary considerably. The whole thing of May fitting in, Osha not fitting in, May wanting to bully Osha into fitting in, gets repeated a few times. We also meet their mother, Coral, who is an unpleasant woman with a personality as sharp as the dozen or so horns on her head. She looks kind of like a pale version of Darth Maul, but with hair. After far too much of this, about 5 minutes, we get to Mother Anastasia, who is the leader of the Space Witches and the most powerful of them, and also the one who created the twins, giving the twins an introductory lesson to the Thread, which is their name for the Force. Presumably the twins already had this lesson because We saw both of them using the Force to immobilize a translucent CGI butterfly in an earlier scene. This show is big on telling people what they already know for the sake of the audience. Anyway, in Anasea's words, all living things are connected by the same thread, a thread woven through all of existence. I'm not doing her voice right at all, but I just want to distinguish it so you know it's a quotation. Now, there's nothing wrong with having different cultures calling the Force by different names. That's just interesting world building. The problem is the particular thing that the writers went with here. A thread. If we assume that the word thread is supposed to suggest, a thread, it suggests that some people are nearer to each other on the thread than to others. Threads are one-dimensional, which means that if it connects everyone, it connects them in a single, well-defined order. And I'm pretty sure that the writers don't mean this at all. Furthermore, a thread that is woven through cloth is not in fact connecting any of the fibers of the cloth. It's going around them. The way you weave is for the weft threads to go over and under the warp threads in alternation. So, this isn't a sensible metaphor, especially since the thread is supposed to be the fabric. I mean, I guess you could technically weave a cloth out of a single extremely long thread by using it as both the warp and weft threads, but that would be a bit weird. You usually want the warp threads to be thicker and stronger than the weft threads. And it would also make it something of a technicality that the warp and weft threads are the same thread, since the different parts would be behaving differently, and then you sew it back into itself. It's a mess. She then uses the Force to pick up a fruit from a basket and move it around in the air. After this demonstration, which, again, presumably, the twins already had, she goes on. Some call it a force and claim to use it, but we know that the thread is not a power you wield. Pull the thread, change everything. Her phrasing, and claim to use it, is weird. Unless she thinks that the Jedi don't actually use the Force for what they do and it's all sleight of hand, obviously they use it. The English verb to use is pretty darn broad. The only way that pull the thread, change everything can possibly not be using the thread is if the thread pullers have no goals in mind when they pull on the thread, which is clearly not true. So their pulling on the thread is clearly using the thread. She's trying to say that the Jedi are bad, unlike the space witches who are good, but she's not actually distinguishing them from the space witches in any way. Also, it's interesting that in her introductory lesson to children inside of a secluded community, she's telling them about how bad the outsiders are. This is very much a cult behavior. And I mean like the Jim Jones type cyanide-laced Kool-Aid drinking cults, which were popular in the 1960s and 70s. Most of them didn't drink cyanide-laced Kool-Aid, but you get what I'm talking about. It's a bad sign when your description to children of the most important facts about the universe is largely about how bad outsiders are. Anyway, Mother Anasea then says that the thread ties you to your destiny and binds you to others. She then turns away from the girls and gives a demonstration of force shoving against another space witch, who force shoves back until Mother Anasea pushes harder and the other space witch is flung back. Mother Anasea then announces, "The power of one." She then nods and has the second space witch come, and it's Mother Anasea against the two space witches working together. They even hold each other's hands while they're pushing. This is more of a challenge, but she still wins, then announces the power of two, which is still not as great as her power of one, so I've got no idea what the lesson is. I guess it's useful to know that space witches can combine their force pushing in parallel, like regular pushing, but did anyone not just assume that force pushing works that way? I mean, it kind of has to, since, two people can push against each other and it sums to 0. Anyway, Mother Anasea then says, "And tonight, at the ceremony, you will experience the power of many." I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but this one-to-many counting system seems to be very important to them. And I find this more than a little strange, because one-to-many is the kind of low-intelligence counting system which I've seen used to make speech-capable animals seem less intelligent than humans. It tends to go along with things like speaking in 3-word sentences and not using articles or prepositions. Why is this low-intelligence counting system a symbol of the Space Witch's philosophy of life? Is this supposed to be some sort of rejection of masculine ways of looking at the world, among which they're counting, well, counting? Maybe they don't know that there are plenty of high-level female mathematicians. Or maybe they do, but the writers think that they don't count as women for some reason. Maybe the writers think their ability to do math is internalized misogyny. This show is written by idiots, so it wouldn't surprise me if they actually believed something like that. Anyway, in the episode, the girls start hitting each other because Osha wasn't paying attention and May was trying to make her pay attention, which was actually going on for a while, but Anastasia finally noticed. So I guess she doesn't have like the force powers of knowing what's going on like the Jedi do. She calls to the girls, who are too busy hitting each other to notice. Mother Coral, who is a strict disciplinarian, looks smugly at Anastasia, and she then kind of gets riled and says to the girls, who still aren't paying attention to her, "Your enemies will not warn you before they attack." And then she attacks them with a thread. Specifically, she force shoves them to the ground. It's unclear if nearly hitting their heads on the stone steps as they fell was part of disciplining them, or just an accidental bonus. Either way, she clearly didn't mean what she said about the thread not being a weapon you wield. That would be a strange preamble to a combat class in any event, but it's especially weird when she clearly uses the thread in anger. She then tells them to get up and block her, clearly establishing that everything set up to now was pointless because the girls already knew it, and Anastasia knew that they knew it. She force shoves at them, and May force shoves back, successfully blocking her until Mother Anastasia stops. It's lots of people going like they're doing something. She praises May for blocking so well. Osha hid behind May the whole time, and Coral reprimands her for it. Curiously, they get out of the scene by the women hearing what the subtitles describe as creaking, which Mother Coral slowly goes to investigate. Nothing comes of this. She doesn't find anything. It was just kind of an excuse to get out of the scene and into the next one. But the next scene is just Mother Anastasia talking to the girls again. Perhaps the actress who played Coral needed to use the bathroom. Anastasia asks what's wrong, and May tells her that Osha is nervous, and Osha says that she doesn't want to do the Ascension ceremony. After the girls argue about this for a bit, Anastasia makes them hold hands and tell each other that they love each other. In fact, after holding hands for a bit, Osha pulls her hand away, and Anastasia tells her, "Hold hands," and makes her hold hands again, then does the "I love you" thing. I think this is meant to show that the Space Witches are loving and about love, but it's actually controlling and about conformity. True love is an act of the will. It is willing the good of the other for the other's sake. Now, doing comforting actions like holding someone's hand can be an act of love, but it's not in itself good. Forcing a child to do external signs without explaining the internal significance just trains them to outward conformity. Don't get me wrong, children do need to be trained and habituated to virtue, but forcing them into the outward signs of virtue does not train them nor habituate them to virtue. It is having them actually practice virtue, which takes quite a bit longer and a lot more effort on the part of the parent, that habituates them to virtue. And they need to understand what they're doing for it to work. Just forcing outward conformity is lazy parenting, which does help to explain why May is evil. Anyway, Anastasia then says that Ascension is about walking through fear. It's about sacrificing a part of yourself, the power of many instead of the power of one. I just want to note in passing that, given everything described about it, the Ascension is a near-perfect metaphor for female genital mutilation. Anastasia continues, "You think you want something different than life in this coven, but that is because you are young. The galaxy is not a place that welcomes women like us." I know that this is supposed to be a heavy-handed metaphor, but it actually isn't. I don't mean that it wasn't meant to be, I'm sure it was. I just mean that it fails to be a metaphor for anything. The whole problem is that Osha doesn't want to be like them, and if she doesn't go through the Ascension, she won't be like them. So it's irrelevant whether what Mother Anastasia said is true about space witches, since the problem that she's trying to address is that Osha doesn't want to be a space witch. The galaxy could, for the sake of argument, be a place that absolutely hates women like Anastasia, and it could still welcome Osha with open arms. I mean, if she doesn't go through with the ceremony. That said, it's also a ridiculous thing to say. The entire galaxy being portrayed as a monoculture is so absurd that it feels like the kind of nonsense that 1960s cults would tell members to brainwash them into staying. If you don't believe me, by the way, read the book Snapped, which is all about cults, how they program people, and also how to deprogram people who leave them. Anyway, half the places we see in Star Wars shows are filled with people who barely care if you murder people in front of them. It's just not plausible that they have an opinion on space witches. Also, but that is because you are young, is at best very badly put. It is absolutely true that children frequently don't know what's best for them, but it's not literally because they're young, and they're well aware of this. If you're trying to teach them, you pretty much instantly lose them if you say, "because you are young." Now, you can say things like, "because you've only seen the good things that it has to offer, but haven't seen the dangers." That works much better because it's actually true. I know that a lot of people are allergic to taking the trouble to say what they mean and just want everyone to magically know it without them saying it, or worse, with them saying the opposite. But that's just the vice of laziness. And, of course, saying what she means would get back to the problem of it not actually being true. What she's saying is, join our cult because our cult is the only safe place for people in our cult. That's not a great sales pitch if you have two brain cells to rub together. And just because we haven't had enough cult-like language yet, Anastasia finishes with, "You and your sister are special, Osha. I want you to stay special." Because the only way to be special is to do what the cult leader wants. This episode, man. Sometime later, Osha and May are getting their hair done, and May is excited, and Osha isn't. And May wants to see Osha's diary, and Osha won't show it to her. And they argue over Osha having privacy from May. And Osha says that they're not the same. And May says that of course they are. And Osha says no, it only seems that way because we're the only children here. At that, the two space witches doing their hair look away awkwardly. And just very awkwardly silent. So, yeah, yet more establishing that this is a cult. A lot of reviews of this episode assume that the space witches are meant to be the good guys and the Jedi the bad guys. I'm honestly not sure. The writers are idiots, so it's impossible to tell, but they did a really good job of making the space witches seem like a controlling Jim Jones-style cult. Of course, that's probably by accident, and they probably didn't realize it, but we sure haven't gotten any evidence that it was an accident. Admittedly, it would be uncharacteristic of Disney Star Wars if these space witches are supposed to be bad and Osha is supposed to have escaped from them, pardon, with the help of the Jedi who rescued her, but that does make a lot more sense with what we've actually seen on screen. Anyway, after some establishing shots at night of the witch's ridiculous stone fortress on the top of a mountain, which really looks like a dam that was transported from someplace with water. It's rounded like it's holding something back. We finally get to the Ascension ceremony. And by the way, the symbolism of this happening at night is not good. Traditionally, witches did their witchcraft at night because light represents truth. The point of waiting until honest people are asleep to go about your activities is that you don't want honest people to see what you're doing. Because it's bad. Just saying. Now, the Ascension is as ridiculous as all the reviews make it out to be. Except it's slower and more drawn out, because pacing is not something that the makers of the Acolyte are good at. There's a lot of silly chanting and silly hand-waving to look magical. But the crux of the ceremony comes down to Anastasia asking each girl to make a vow, and if she makes it, putting blue energy into her head, which then gives her a forehead tattoo. It's the tattoo's sort of a spiral made out of one line with 2 dots near the center. It's like starts from the middle and then works out and goes around each other. The spiral is clearly meant to represent the thread, but I've got no idea what the 2 dots are supposed to represent. Anyway, the vow is rather curious. I get the sense that the writers really wanted a vow, but didn't spend much time writing it. Do you vow upon my death to protect the secrets of our coven and continue our legacy? There are kind of a lot of pieces to this in spite of it being short. First, the vow contains nothing until Mother Anastasia dies? Anything goes until then? Spill their secrets, do no witchcraft, whatever, until she dies? Really? Or is the idea that they're vowing on her death, in the way that people might normally vow on their life or on someone else's life? But that doesn't work, because that kind of vow is using the thing as a guarantee of fulfilling the vow. Like posting a bond for bail. If you break your promise, the thing vowed upon is forfeit. So, like, if you vow on your life or someone else's life, that means that if you break your vow, you're asking the enforcer of the vow to kill you, or them. I mean, I know that people just say stuff and don't mean it, but that's what the words mean. You can't vow on someone's death in that sense. It would mean that if you break your vow, Anastasia doesn't get to die. You can't. That doesn't work. That's not a thing. I mean, I suppose that in some sense that's what the whole servitude to Davy Jones was in Pirates of the Caribbean, or the kids who traded their eyes for buttons in Coraline. But you need a very specific kind of setup to be able to condemn someone to being chained to this life forever and never allowed to pass into the afterlife. And they sure don't have that here. Moving on to the next part. To protect the secrets of our coven. I mean, again, this is classic cult stuff. The premise of the coven is that they have insight into the nature of the universe others don't have. Not telling anyone is rather selfish. Or you don't do it because everyone will laugh at you. The truth wants to be shared. And what does protecting these secrets entail? Does that just mean not telling anyone? Or is this punishing space witches who want to leave? Or maybe there's a book of secrets inside their fortress of bad counting, and they're supposed to keep people from getting at it? Lest they learn how to not count well? And what constitutes continuing our legacy? Is that just doing whatever they've already been doing? I mean, as far as we can tell, the coven is basically just a low-tech commune which periodically uses the thread to carry fruit and shove each other. What legacy is there to continue? Is this basically just a vow to live in this stone fortress forever? But they've established that they only recently came to this planet. So what legacy is there to continue? A hunter-gatherer lifestyle? Or does this mean that May and Osha are supposed to use the thread to make more girls to keep the coven going? That would be really sketchy, since it would mean one sister impregnating the other. I hope they don't mean that. Anyway, there are a few other oddities about the ceremony. At the beginning, Mother Anastasia gives a speech. Tonight, we enact a ceremony we have not performed since our exile. We were hunted, persecuted, forced into hiding, all because some would consider our power dark, unnatural. And then we were blessed with a miracle. The gift of life. In that last part, she sounds almost like Dr. Frank N. Furter in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. It's a weird delivery with a lot of more dramatic pauses than I gave it. But more importantly, the substance is weird. I mean, most of the women look like they're in their 20s or 30s, meaning that 8 years ago, some would have been teenagers and many in their 20s. Those aren't demographics where you consider yourself on the brink of extinction until someone finally conceives a child. Plus, they're an all-female cult. They grew through recruitment, not reproduction. Saying that the best thing that happened to them was gaining the power of reproduction, whether biologically or by the power of the thread, is essentially repudiating the single-sex nature of their monastic community. This is almost exactly the pop understanding of Freud's concept of penis envy. They're celebrating gaining the power to fertilize a female, which is literally what defines a male as a male. Guppies, the ornamental fish people often keep in fish tanks, freshwater, can do this. If you have a bunch of just females, one of them will turn into a male and start fertilizing the other females. Throughout the animal kingdom, the real animal kingdom, not in fantasy, there is a lot of variety in sex determination. Anyway, what the space witches are celebrating is basically what guppies do, except without developing physical sperm or a sperm-injecting organ. The symbolism of this is just so confused. Actually, it's even worse than that, since the girls look a lot like Anastasia and nothing like Coral. So it's not even that Anastasia used the power of the thread to fertilize Coral's eggs. She just used the power of the thread to coalesce two children that look like her inside of Coral's uterus, making Coral a mere surrogate. This kind of goes farther than the pop understanding of penis envy into actual, literal misogyny. That is, not valuing the things that make females female. In normal sexual reproduction, the child is descended from both parents. That is, made from both of its parents. The mother is not merely an incubator. In fact, in real sexual reproduction, there's a sense in which the child is more descended from its mother than from its father. Children only get DNA from their father, but they get all of their cellular machinery, which has significant influence over how their genes are expressed, from their mother. Celebrating as their highest achievement that Anastasia basically became a male that doesn't need a female to reproduce is, well, if you have actual respect for actual women, let's just say that this is problematic. Also, as a side note, people using the Force any way they want without restriction is an excellent metaphor for people who want machine guns, cannons, rocket launchers, and so forth to be unregulated for civilian ownership. It's not a great metaphor for many other things. I mean, with a bit of work, you can make it a metaphor for irresponsible sexual reproduction. The power to create life is not trivial, and it affects more than just yourself. But then the space witches are a metaphor for deadbeat dads. What they want symbolizing here being things like no child support and there being no social consequences for abandoning your children. So I kind of don't think that the writers meant this one either. But there are no positive interpretations of the Space Witch's coven as it has been presented. So no matter how you want to interpret this metaphor, I'm really not seeing how the Space Witches are supposed to be the good guys. Oh, just because we haven't gotten enough cult-like stuff already, during Anastasia's speech, we get shots of women who are writhing around in quasi-ecstasy. And more than once, someone laughs hysterically. The subtitle was, "Witch Laughs Maniacally." That's, okay. Oh, also, right before May and Osha come up to take their vows, Anastasia says, "What the thread has tied together, no one can separate." It's kind of creepy that this sounds like a wedding pronouncement on two 8-year-old sisters. I don't actually think that that's how it was meant. I think they just wanted words that sounded dramatic and ritualish. But it does not sound good if you haven't forgotten who they're talking about. Oh, one minor positive thing in this whole thing. We learned that Osha's actual name is Verosha. So it turns out that she wasn't named after the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. She was only nicknamed after it. Still a terrible choice, but not as bad as it could have been. Anyway, Osha takes the vow, but before she can get the Force Energy head tattoo, the Jedi walk in and interrupt. It's Carrie-Anne Moss, Sol, a Wookiee Jedi, and a teenage Torben, who is Carrie-Anne Moss's Padawan. There's a bunch of back and forth where no one is honest, and the Jedi are concerned that the Space Witches are training children in the use of the Force, and claim the right to test the children for Jedi training. Anastasia force tortures Torben and says that if Carrie-Anne Moss wants her Padawan returned to his right mind, they should all leave now. She's interrupted by Osha saying that she wants to show them what she was taught and take the test. Anastasia releases Torben and says that the scouts will bring the girls to be tested at midday. The Jedi then, leave. And Anastasia holds a council with her advisors, which look to be somewhere between about a quarter and half of the total coven. Anyway, Coral wants to kill the Jedi, but cooler heads with a better sense of self-preservation prevail, and they decide that the girls should just fail the test on purpose, and then everything will go back to the way it was. Because, apparently, Anastasia having demonstrated the Force power to kill is unimportant, because she's an adult. After this council, Anastasia goes to talk to the girls. The girls, as usual, are arguing. May says that the Jedi are bad. Osha says that the Jedi are good. Anastasia says, this isn't about good or bad. This is about power and who is allowed to use it. There are several things to say about this. First, obviously, this is evil. If you say that moral questions are irrelevant, you're just saying that you're fine with evil. That's how it actually works. The only people who say differently are lying because they're evil. Please note, I don't mean that there are no amoral questions. There are plenty of them. Whether your laptop is better off with batteries in parallel or series configuration is not a moral question. But whether the Jedi are good or evil, and therefore whether it's even legitimate to want to join them, very much is a moral question. Second, people who are concerned with power over good are evil. She's simply trying to justify evil. There are things she could be saying, which, might sound superficially similar to, what she's actually saying, if she were arguing that the Jedi are good, but not the only good, and the Space Witches have a right to use the power of the thread to fulfill their responsibilities, and the Jedi, though often good, are wrong to try to take away the power that they have a right to because of their responsibilities, that would sound a little like this. If you want to see that kind of thing non-theoretically, look up arguments against gun control. But that's not what she's doing. She wants to be responsible to no one. She would rather rule in hell than serve in heaven. Not that hell and heaven actually, concepts that Star Wars people understand, but the basic idea. Be that as it may, her phrasing is ridiculous. Power, and who is allowed to use it, is nonsensical. Power is the ability to enforce your will. If you need someone's permission, you don't have power. And it makes no sense to say that you have a moral right to be allowed to do whatever you want. That's just asking people to give you power over them for free. There's another weird exchange where Anastasia tells Osha that right now she wants to be a Jedi, but people change, like the seasons. In winter, they hunt with bunta. In summer, with bows and arrows. Osha then points out that they hunt in both seasons, and that doesn't change. To which Anastasia has no answer. It's interesting that they included Osha outwitting her. It's kind of a pity that Osha didn't keep going and mention that what Anastasia said applies equally well to the Ascension. Now May wants to be a space witch, but in winter she might not want to be anymore. That's kind of the intrinsic problem with having children make irreversible decisions based upon their inclinations. That's why the only things that you're supposed to let children commit to are matters of principle, where they would be wrong to choose otherwise. Things like learning basic knowledge, habituating to generosity, and habituating to honesty. These are things that you commit children to because they are right to do, for everyone. You don't enroll an 8-year-old in a lifelong school of painting or lifelong school of plumbing because you may well find out, as they age and become their full selves as adults, that they're cut out for something else entirely. Which, of course, gets us back to the space witches not being good. Anyway, this half-assed pseudo-philosophy over, it's time for the test. May fails and Osha passes, both on purpose, and this does not make May happy. All her controlling cruelty comes to the surface and, back in their room, she tells Osha that she won't let Osha go. Osha replies that May can't stop her, but May says, "Yes, I can." When Osha asks her how, May looks insane and says, "I'll kill you." Whereupon she grabs Osha's diary, runs outside, locks the door, and sets the diary on fire using a lamp in the hallway which has an exposed flame. Inside, Osha, horrified, runs to the window and calls out for help. No one hears her, of course. At the sound of the lamp crashing on the floor, which closed captions describes as object clatters, she looks back and the door is engulfed in flame. like all the way, floor to ceiling. We then get a shot of the door from the hallway where the flame, are just as big and spreads away from the door along the stone floor and up the stone walls. It's spreading only mildly slower than had the stone been gasoline-soaked paper. I think that the witches could have used the real Osha here because they clearly had some safety issues with their lighting system and wall materials. Anyway, Osha opens a very large vent and escapes from the room through it into a tunnel system. As she walks below a floor grate in the room above her, she hears the fire, which is apparently spread all over the stone castle, as well as rumbling and explosions and a bunch of space witches screaming. She then comes into some giant cavern with some sort of technology inside that looks vaguely like a smaller version of the main engine pit in the Death Star. And she spots May, who came into the room from a different entrance. Osha asks where Mama is, not specifying who she means, and May replies, "Mama's dead." Osha asks May, "What have you done?" And May asks Osha, "What have you done?" And then Osha asks May, "What have you done?" It really is that repetitive. And then the bridge May is on collapses, and then the bridge Osha is on collapses, but as she falls, Sol runs in and grabs her by her hand. In a competently written story, we'd wonder how Sol got there so fast, but since the writers of this show don't understand that things happen for reasons, odds are 50-50 that the writers never asked themselves why he was there at that time. After pulling her to safety, they run out of the fortress, past the main hall where all of the space witches are lying around, dead. Since there's no obvious cause of death, this being one of the few rooms that isn't on fire, and since they're all lying around as if they were standing around and just fell down, I like the critical drinkers theory that they died of boredom. It's kind of either that or, I don't know. They're lying down like the mobsters did in the Star Trek episode A Piece of the Action, when the Enterprise fires a stun blast on wide dispersion, and everyone outside, who were shooting at each other with Tommy guns, just fell down. They're not even all lying down in the same direction. Maybe the idea is that they died of carbon dioxide poisoning from the fire? But then how would Osha and Sol walk through the room just fine? Anastasia, I think, is dead in the courtyard, and Sol rushes Osha away to the ship because the stone castle, which is on fire, is crumbling around them. And pieces are falling like an earthquake is going on. Back on the ship, Osha wakes up on a medical table, for some reason, and doesn't remember what happened, for some reason, and Sol explains what just happened to her, that May set a fire and it killed everyone, Sol then says that they're taking her to Coruscant, where she will be safe, and that if she wishes, she can be his Padawan. She hugs him. Then we get a shot of May walking up to the Bunta tree. That's the place where they were in the opening scene, and calling for Osha. And we go to credits, which are still over 5 minutes long. I looked up the ending credits to Star Wars, A New Hope, and they were only 4.5 minutes long. So, once again, we come to the problem that this show is a suspense thriller, in which there's no point to speculating about anything because the writers are incompetent. Does it make any sense that the fire spread through a giant stone metal structure in like 3 minutes? No, but the writers clearly don't know how fire works. Does it make sense that Sol got to Osha in time? No, but the writers don't seem to understand that things happen for reasons and so need explanations. Though, that said, Sol is a Jedi, so his presence could easily be explained by having a vision that he was needed and going there. Why none of the other Jedi came with him, I have no idea, and I doubt that the writers do either. That thing where Torben said, "Forgive me, we thought we were doing the right thing," sounds like it should mean that things weren't as they seemed in what we saw, but that would mean that he said that for a reason, which requires a belief that things happen for reasons, instead of just happening. Ultimately, I have no idea what to make of this episode. I mean, it's bad. That's obvious. But what kind of bad is it? The sort of people who make it are the sort of people you would expect to try to bludgeon the audience with a message that could have been sent by email or posted to Twitter for a lot less money. But the problem is that such people don't understand symbolism. They tend to think of it like a coded message, where you're supposed to decode the message with your secret decoder ring. And so they tell stories where the actual symbolism, the structure of the story, as opposed to the names or particular catchphrases that people say, is weird or even the opposite of what they mean. So, to give an example, this episode looks a bit like a thinly veiled reference to the standoff at Waco, Texas, between the Branch Davidians and the ATF, if you're not American, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and the FBI, where the Jedi are the ATF/FBI, and the Space Witches are the Branch Davidians, who were a doomsday cult that was stockpiling weapons. For those not familiar, most of the Branch Davidians died in fires, the origin of which is disputed. Of course, I doubt that this episode is meant to be a metaphor for the battle at Waco, Texas, but it works better as that, at least if you believe the FBI that the Branch Davidians started the fires, than it does as a symbol for anything else, which is absurd. Oh, there is also the curious part, early on, where Mother Anastasia said to Coral, "I told you this planet would be a safe haven for our coven." She was so spectacularly wrong that it reminds me of the Kirkland Safety Society, which was a bank founded by Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, which went bankrupt in about a month. There's some dispute as to whether or not he actually prophesied that it would last for a really long time. There isn't great evidence for that, but there's some evidence he hinted at it. The only thing the Space Witches work as a metaphor for are things which Disney would never hold up as good. So maybe it's not meant to be a message. Maybe the people who don't believe things happen for reasons just put stuff on screen and didn't mean anything by it. Maybe this is just a live action ink blot where there's no idea. It just happens to look like there's an idea if you use your imagination. And, frustratingly, we're not going to find out for 5 more episodes. If we will even find out then. There are no guarantees that they will resolve anything or try to have a conclusion to the story. It could just be stuff happening with meaningless character moments and then it's over, leaving the whole thing just an ink blot. At least that's all for now, though. So until next time, may you hit everything you aim at. If you like this video, then clicking the like button, according to YouTube, will make them more likely to recommend it to others. If you know anyone who might get something out of this video, then it would be kind to share it with them, or just share it on social media in general. And if you'd like to see future videos of mine, you can subscribe. And if you're not in the habit of checking your subscriptions page regularly, then I suggest clicking the notification bell and setting that to always, because otherwise subscribing to a channel basically just sort of like gives YouTube a hint that maybe it should consider recommending these videos to you, possibly at some point, if they think so. It's a funny world we live in. God bless.